Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. A quick reminder to support this Rebel transmission. You can do that by becoming a paid subscriber on Substack, $5 a month or $50 a year or more. Subscribers get a few perks, such as weekly private chats we do with members only to shoot the breeze, to discuss current events, as well as get access to my weekly news headlines that I publish at the end of the week. You can also support the broadcast by buying me a coffee, sending some pesos via donor box or Wise, Subscribestar, Locals, Crypto. You can also purchase a consultation if you want to chat with me about expatriating, geopolitics, or the meaning of life, anything you like. And do check out my affiliates, easydns.com. Use the coupon code geopolitics to get 15% off of hosting or domains. Wise Wolf Gold, Above Phone, and Legal Shield if you're Canadian or American. You can contact me or use my affiliate link to sign up to Legal Shield. It's a $30 a month membership option where you get access to lawyers to deal with a whole host of issues: speeding tickets, IRS audits, business stuff, legal documents. And do leave a podcast review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to the transmission. Joining us for the first time on Geopolitics and Empire is retired attorney at law John O'Loughlin, author of Macduff Lives: The Life and Untimely Death of Thomas F. O'Loughlin, Jr. Welcome to Geopolitics and Empire, John.
Thank you very much, Revoyer. And may I say I'm a happy subscriber to your Substack, and all of your work is really, really worthwhile. So, folks, I'm a great, happy endorser of Revoyer's many resources.
Yeah, and so, you were on my TNT show, I think, once, maybe twice. And again, the links are in the description. People can follow you on Twitter X and your Rumble channel. I join you monthly on your live transmission there, which is a lot of fun. You got a lot of other great people on your monthly transmission. Harley Schlanger, he's been a guest on the podcast, and many other folks. But, this time I sort of wanted to get your deep dive, your memory dump, your data dump on, to discuss your father, the deep state, right? The American Empire and stuff like that. We've never really done that with you. And I think there's a lot that we can learn. And you start out your book, and it's a short book. If people buy it, you can read it in 1 or 2 or 3 sittings. And I really like the quote that you started out with by Bertrand Russell. Not a fan of his, but again, that's kind of what I do in the podcast. Is there are people that you can not be fans of, but that make true statements. And I'll read the quote here. It says, "On those rare occasions when the boy or girl who has passed the age at which it is usual to determine social status shows such marked ability as to seem the intellectual equal of the rulers, a difficult situation will arise requiring serious consideration. If the youth is content to abandon his previous associates and to throw in his lot wholeheartedly with the rulers, he may, after suitable tests, be promoted. But if he shows any regrettable solidarity with his previous associates, the rulers will reluctantly conclude that there is nothing to be done with him except to send him to the lethal chamber before his ill-disciplined intelligence has had time to spread revolt. This will be a painful duty to the rulers, but I think they will not shrink from performing it." And that sort of touches on the theme of your father and his work. And so maybe we can start early on. You discuss your family history. Early on, you mentioned something interesting, that an extraordinary event happens, that your father was awarded a scholarship to the elite Loomis School. And you beg the question, was he promised to these elites to be given a future within the elite establishment that would benefit Uncle John's employers? And so, wherever you'd like to start discussing Tom O'Loughlin, Jr.
Thank you very much. And my dad was born in 1920, and to be precise, on March the 21st of 1920. And, I'll start off by tossing out something for the conspiracy theorists, and that is that if you do the numerology on that, it is 333. And he died on June the 6th of 1971, which, if you do the numerology on that, it's 6, and then 1971 factors to 18, which is 3 6s. The real one that really got me was when I got his death certificate, and the time of death is 5/5/55, which numerologically is 15, which adds up to 6. So there's another 6 in there. So, for those of you who think that there is some kind of a Kabbalistic angle to the way that the world is being controlled, I offer you those 3 numbers to consider, and then you consider the life of my dad. Yeah, he was born in. He was second generation Irish. Both of his mother and father were of Irish descent, and the O'Loughlin clan from the west coast of County Clare ended up, of course, immigrating. A lot of them went to Australia. A few of them went to Connecticut, Boston, New York, and of course, New Haven is another place. So the O'Loughlins that I belong to ended up in Hartford, Connecticut, the capital city of the state, and were really working their way up, like lace curtain Irish, the idea of suppressing their Irishness. My dad didn't have any clue as to, the fact that we were, his grandparents probably spoke Irish. And they came from one of the most western parts of Ireland, so that means the least influenced by the British conquest. So, with that background, my grandfather, my dad's father, was the first one to go to college, and he was given I believe, a scholarship to Catholic University in Washington, D.C. He graduated in 1919 and married my grandmother not long after that, and my dad was born in 1920. Now, there was trouble in the family with regard to the marriage, and my grandmother ended up separating from my grandfather, which put my dad in the house of his paternal grandparents, which, is called the family. So he was raised not by his mother, but by his grandparents and their 5 children. And so he was kind of an appendage to an existing large Irish Catholic family that was trying to be as Anglo-Saxon as they could, as they were working their way into the legal business. Also, Hartford Fire Insurance was very important. My dad's Uncle John, who you mentioned earlier, was an employee of Hartford Fire. He worked for the for Hartford Fire for a long career and became a vice president at the end of his career. So Hartford Fire is an important institution in many, many ways. It's related to the Bissell family, and we talk about Richard M. Bissell as being one of the dark side guys in the CIA, who may very well have been involved in what happened to my father. So anyway, yeah, my father was groomed, as other people have said. I know that many people have been aware of this process of selecting a child and grooming them to be what I call a servitor, someone who's going to serve the empire that exists. And so while the Irish side of my father's family was trying to be American, the only way that could happen would be if they became more English than the English, to reverse a famous saying about what happened to the English who moved to Ireland. So they became upwardly mobile in a sense that draws them into what you and I call now the blob or the deep state, the white shoe law firms. So he was sent to Loomis Academy. He graduated from there in 1938, along with another person who became much more famous, and that is George P. Schultz, who was also on the football team, and they were both competitive and both in the yearbooks voted as like the best athlete but also there's a little bit of rivalry that you can sense there. Well, Schultz, I believe, went to Princeton. My dad went to Harvard, and again on a full scholarship. not a football scholarship, an academic scholarship. And he spent 4 years there, graduating in 1942, just as World War II was drawing all the young men into the services. He became a midshipman at the Columbia School of the U.S. Naval Reserve Officers Training School. And by some amazing, let's just say fate, his first assignment was to the USS Nashville, which is a very important ship for World War II. Did a lot of secret stuff, and was seems to have been one of the ships that was used to do lots of amazing things. And one of the things that they did was they served as the flagship for General MacArthur. And so when General MacArthur is doing his island hopping from New Guinea up to the Philippines, when he is on board, because of course he's on land a lot, but when he's on any ship, he's on the Nashville more than any of the others, and he called it his flagship. So imagine how shocked I was, Herboyer, about 8 or 9 years ago when I was looking on the internet for photographs of the USS Nashville. And I had seen all the Navy photographs, and I thought, I'm probably not going to find anything new, but darn if there wasn't an Army photograph. And this Army photographer took a picture of General MacArthur on the bridge of the Nashville, and 2 guys away from him is this big guy looking through the binoculars, and I recognized that was my dad. He was on the bridge, as a young second lieutenant, but he's watching through the binoculars on October the 20th, 1944, as the Leyte Gulf landing is happening at Leyte Gulf. And this is where MacArthur leaves the Nashville, takes a transport to shore, wades ashore, and goes up to the microphone and says, "Ladies and gentlemen of the Philippines, I have returned." So my dad seems to have been kind of being groomed all along the way in the Navy. And after the Navy, after the war was over, he was actually offered a commission in the full-time Navy. Of course, they were all reserve commissions during the war. But this is where his family intervenes and says, "No, we need you to come home. We need you to come back to Connecticut," because once again, the family was trying to groom him along with Uncle John to groom him into that white shoe law firm life that would, basically be great for the family, but you would sacrifice your own dreams in order to do something that you didn't really want to do. And he's probably seen enough of that at Loomis and Harvard to know that was just not his type of life that he wanted to live. So after he graduated from law school, and I don't know how this happened, but he decided to join the FBI.
Before going to the FBI, I just wanted to mention, again, the photo is in your book. And I mean, I think for you, that would mean a lot. For me also, I always mention this in the podcast, the fact I like to go back into that history through my blood and feel that history. Like I mentioned, my grandfather being a prisoner of the Nazi regime, my great grandfather dying as a result of World War I and stuff like that. And it's got great meaning. And I think people can, where they can, research their family history. And I wanted to bring up just a quote, which I used to use when I taught Mexican history, when you talk about your father being groomed. And there was a quote from the 1924, the U.S. Secretary of State, Robert Lansing. And I think you can apply this everywhere. This is, the case of U.S. trying to control Mexico, or even domestically in the case of the U.S. grooming the elite for themselves. And Secretary of State Lansing said in 1924, "Mexico is a country extraordinarily easy to dominate because it is enough only to control a single man, the president. We must abandon the idea of installing an American citizen in the Mexican presidency, as that would only lead us once again to war. The solution requires more time. We must open the doors of our universities to young, ambitious Mexicans and make the effort to educate them in the American way of life, in our values, and respect for the leadership of the U.S. Mexico will need competent administrators, and over time, these young people will come to occupy important positions and will eventually take possession of the presidency itself. And without the U.S. having to spend a single cent or fire a single shot, they will do what we want and could do it better and more radically than we ourselves could have done. And I've seen some of my former Mexican students working for State Department, for the Mexican Foreign Service, hanging out with Justin Trudeau. And it's that same principle, I think, in the U.S. and everywhere else. They groom a globalist liberal elite class to sort of do their bidding. And then again, in your book, going to the FBI, you write, he's hanging out with Hoover, that he was working nonstop Saturdays. He sometimes was called upon to do actual maintenance work on Hoover's home on the weekends. That your mom would say that Daddy was an undercover agent who did black bag jobs, stakeouts, general spying activities, and that Tom was relied upon by Director Hoover to do a whole host of stuff. So, if you want to tell us about the FBI days.
Well, one of the pictures I think I put in the book is a picture of my dad not long after he moved to Washington, D.C. and married my mother after having his first assignment in Atlanta, Georgia, where he met her and married her. But there in that picture, you can see him looking just about as tough as you can imagine a man looking. I mean, there he is, 6'3" or so, maybe 220 pounds of muscle, and just a big bull-necked guy with the bulging arms, and in his he's wearing a suit, and in his trousers pocket there is something that absolutely is a gun. There's no question about it. And what I think he's doing is he's looking back at those people that tried to force him into a life that he didn't want, and saying, no, I'm going my own way. Don't mess with me. And so that idea that he joined the FBI in order to be away from the powers of New England money and finance, which I think he was being groomed for, and I don't really know what it was that attracted him to the FBI, except for a desire to keep serving the country. And he certainly did do that. The most amazing thing about that I found about his FBI career is what I call the 68,000 files. And the way that happened was in about 1952 or 3, he was assigned by Director Hoover to put together a task force, and he had 24 people working for him, half of them lawyers and half of them secretaries, and they were going through 68,000 and some what are called application files. And as I studied that material and the time that was going on, I realized that these people were being vetted by Hoover for something, probably a visa or a green card, so that they could stay in the United States, because there was tremendous pressure from the CIA and from the people that were associating with the post-World War II Radline folks to bring people into the United States. And in many cases, they just brought them in without any permission at all, and were looking for, forgiveness later in the form of getting their visas signed off on. And so, and it was very interesting. One of the first things that I did in my investigation was to go to Florida and talk to Wayne Madsen about it. And he said, yeah, that probably was the Eastern Europeans that they were trying to bring in, people associated with the Ukrainian Nazi armies, and the Hungarians, and the other ones from the Baltic states, and Belarusians, which was very interesting. A book written by John Loftus about the Belarusians. fantastic stuff out there. As you say, if you dig, you can find it. So anyway, this is why I think, with my dad having that experience and then becoming assigned to counterintelligence after that, he worked out of the old post office building, the building that became Trump. I guess it's whatever it was, the Trump Hotel in Washington for a while, and it's no longer that. But the old post office building is a classic building in Washington D.C. in which the Washington field office had its headquarters, and that's where he took me as a little bitty boy one day. And one of my early childhood memories is being there on the fourth or fifth floor of that old building. But then, as the 50s ended and President Kennedy was elected, there came a call for a change with the CIA. And of course, that followed the Bay of Pigs, the one that was that dropped on Kennedy's lap just as he becomes the president. And it famously failed and got a lot of Cuban patriots killed. But President Kennedy took responsibility, and then he fired the CIA director, Allen Dulles, his associate, Richard Bissell, whose family I mentioned before, and Charles Cable, the general that was part of it as well. And by getting rid of them, he was signaling that he was no longer going to put up with their secret operations. Not saying that we don't need secret operations, we just can't let those guys run it. They're either running their own shop that's not subordinate to the government of the United States, which is, I think, has been shown very well in many books since then, but also because he could not trust them to execute the missions because it was a failure. So he put it in the hands of the Pentagon, and they created an office called SACSA, the Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Operations. And my dad was drafted from the FBI to become a special operations planner with that operation and with that office, SACSA. And that's where he spent his last 10 years before his really untimely death of cancer in June of 1971. That's a thumbnail, I guess, of my dad's short but amazing career.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I mean, him rubbing shoulders with, again, General MacArthur, Edgar Hoover, Kennedy, I mean, wild. And then this SACSA office, again, if people read, we brought this book up with my recent podcast guest from Sweden, Mats Nielsen, James Douglas's JFK and the Unspeakable. Fantastic book. I assigned chapters to my students when I taught international relations at the time. And basically, you mentioned in your book Fletcher Prouty and Kennedy. There are, I think, numerous reasons they wanted him out. And it was said that he wanted to split the CIA into 1,000 pieces, and kind of as you're alluding to, he wanted to deal with an out of control CIA, and SACSA seemed to be like one of the steps to do that. Your father was there, and then we all know what happens to Kennedy and his brother, and then eventually your father. And so I guess, well, before getting to the health issue, you also discuss the Halliwell plan and drug running. You mentioned Doug Valentine. He's been on the podcast. He's done great work. And so it seems like your father was also a man of integrity, trying to do what was right according to what the U.S. government is supposed to do. And then he discovers this, CIA drug running, which you discuss in the book. And it seemed like he was going to attempt to stop it. If you want to tell us more about that. And you go eventually talk to Doug Valentine and discover in one of his books, there's this character called Mr. Hammer, and you guys figure out that was actually your father.
Yeah, that's another one of those just jaw-dropping experiences. I'm always be grateful to Doug Valentine, the great author of the Phoenix program, and and a dozen of very important books. His most recent one, Pisces Moon, very much worth reading. And I look forward to maybe interviewing him again. He was kind enough to give me a lot of his time and help me sort out the picture that happened in the 60s with my dad. So, yeah, when President Kennedy is assassinated, then SACSA is no longer what Kennedy had wanted it to be. It becomes more and more infiltrated with CIA Air Force guys, and not just Air Force but Army. But a lot of the Air Force generals are double-hatted. They're like they have an office in the CIA and they have an office in the Pentagon. And so what happens is that they start putting the CIA programs through SACSA, just like before, like there wasn't a SACSA. And that was going on. And so what happens is the drug operations in Laos, which have come to light and are still getting a lot of revelations, but we were running a secret war in Laos, aside from Vietnam and aside from Cambodia, trying to control the government there by controlling a warlord named Vang Pao. Vang Pao, who is, I think he's recently died, but he became American. Brought thousands of his Montagnard people, the refugees from the communists, into America, and a very a mixed character, because the fact is, in that place at that time, opium was money. There just wasn't any money. But there was a lot of opium. And so people being who they are, they figured out ways to make money with it. And Vang Pao, of course, was a drug lord. So what I found out through snooping when I was about maybe 14 years old was that there was a man involved in the Air Force efforts to create an Air Force for the Royal Lao Army back in the 50s and 60s, and his name was Barney Cochran. And the reason that I found out about Barney Cochran was because as a 14-year-old trying to figure out who my dad was, I had looked in one of his drawers and found these two books, one of them called Terror in Vietnam and the other one called The Montagnards. And I lost the Montagnard book, but I still have the Terror in Vietnam book, written by a man who wrote a lot for Soldier of Fortune, by the way, by the name of J. Mallon. And that book is inscribed by J. Mallon to Barney Cochran. And so I have that J. Mallon signature inscribing it to this guy, Barney Cochran. So who is Barney Cochran? Well, he was a major in the Air Force that was training the Montagnard guys to fly these T-28s in order to fight against the North Vietnamese army. A real tough and ultimately losing proposition, but that's who he was. And my dad had told me about the books because I said, Dad, what are these books? And here's what his answer was. Oh, a couple of guys wanted me to look at them, but I didn't like what they were talking about. So I need to give them back to them. And so I assumed Barney Cochran was one of them. And I assumed that my dad being at SACSA and being the guy that controls, I mean, he was the top guy for all special ops operations. So whatever they wanted to do had to cross his desk. And I think they probably wanted to get his permission to do something that violated his conscience. And that would have happened about 1965 or so. And then the next thing we know is that although the SACSAs, I think by 66, 67 were well within the CIA's control, there was a gap in early 67 in which they didn't have a SACSA for like 2 or 3 months. And it was during that time that Doug Valentine figures that that's when they ran the TDY operation. Now, the TDY operation is described in Doug Valentine's book of that name, and it's a roman à clef, so that the names are changed. But both he just said, no, he's 99% certain that that was my dad in the story, where he uses the name Mr. Hammer, because like my dad, Mr. Hammer, Mike Hammer, and the detective had a big bull neck, and so that tells me that my dad was still participating in an effort to stop the CIA and the blob, the deep state, running opium and heroin, because of course they had built the harem labs by then, and then were facilitating, if not profiting from, at least facilitating the shipment of the heroin to Thailand, to Bangkok, and sadly to Da Nang and Saigon, where our soldiers picked up the habit. And there comes the horrors of the 70s with our terrible drug epidemics, the Crips and the Bloods, and all of this horrible addiction that we're still inundated with. That comes from the same mindset that would allow Vang Pao in the first place to run the operations in Laos, and right under the noses of the Americans, if not with their actual consent or even participation. So yeah, my dad was in the crosshairs of people like Alan Dulles and Richard Bissell and a few others I could name. And so the story of how he died is also just raises so many questions for me. It's been one of the amazing journeys that I've been on, is to try to figure out whether they could weaponize cancer, whether it was something that they tried to do, whether my dad may have been what do we call cancer-sided. Basically, it's an incredible coincidence that he was the chief. He was the person that would have overseen the entire planning of the Sante raid, which went on in November of 1970, about the same time that he got his diagnosis of cancer. And he died, 7-8 months later. And the last 4 or 5 months of it, he was in a hospital room where he was not. He told us no visitors. I think he was probably ordered not to see anybody, so that they would know that what he knew didn't get passed on to anybody else, such as a curious son, for instance. And so we were told to stay away. But as you know from the book itself, I couldn't do that. So I went down to see him one day, and there he was in his really terribly emaciated form. He probably lost 100 pounds and could hardly talk. I think maybe he was whispering at me so that if there was microphones, that they wouldn't get picked up. But he was waving at me like, "Go away, get out, go away." And so I had brought some books to read and thought I could just sit with him and spend a little time with him, knowing he was going to die soon, but couldn't do that. But you know what they did for him? They gave him a commendation. They gave him the Defense Secretary of Defense Meritorious Civilian Service Medal, which is the highest civilian service medal that the Defense Department gives, and it's only given once a year or even less. So he was given that, knowing that he was dying of the cancer, but they gave him that award. It's a fascinating thing to know that Secretary Laird at the time, Admiral uh, oh, I'm sorry, the chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and everybody in the Pentagon basically signed off on the request that he get that award. And so he got the award. And I think, that is somebody's effort to kind of just put a cap on his life and say, yes, he was a great man. And, no, we can't talk about what he did, but he was a great man. Look, we gave him this award. My dad was by that time just kind of, he didn't respect the system anymore. He had been completely disillusioned. And I remember when we had the funeral, and my mother said she didn't know whether he would like to have the American flag on his casket or not. And she asked us kids, and I ended up being the one that said, yeah, I think we should put it. So they did. It's just devastating to my family. Of course, we never really recovered from it. I've been so privileged to have the last 7 or 8 years since I was able to retire from practicing law to do just tons of research. I've got a fairly huge library that's starting to eat us out of the house here. And I just keep on digging and doing what I can to present my findings on McDuff Lives, on my Rumble show, and of course I'm often on Twitter and also on Facebook. So I do what I can to get when I find something that I believe, yes, this is the truth, this is what people should study, then I want to share it. So that's been my personal contribution to try to keep the McDuff story alive. By the way, we call him McDuff because when I was first introduced you may be familiar with citizen journalist George Webb.
Yeah.
And George was working in Washington, D.C. for a while back in 2017. And I saw some of his stuff on the internet, and I said, you know what, he might know something that can help me. So I got in touch with him, and I went down and met with him. And we spent like 4 or 5 hours just getting to know each other, talking about Shakespeare and things that we had in common. And I really thought, here's somebody that I can work with to try to sort this out. And we did. We worked together for a couple of years doing just like things like going to the National Archives and looking up cases that my dad was involved in. It was really a fantastic pleasure to work with George. But he wanted to talk about my dad, but I didn't want to use my last name because, I still have extended relatives, and of course people may not want me to be successful either. And so I was happy when we had finished talking about the play Macbeth, and he said, well, let's call him McDuff. And I said, okay, we'll call him McDuff. And so that's what we did. So McDuff Lives is my dad. This little book tells his career and some of our personal story as well. And I'm carrying on as much as I can to try to fulfill the mission. And what is the mission? The mission is preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Yeah, and I do want to turn towards to get your opinion then on where we are and where we might be headed. But just, I guess, one more point. You bring up Stephen Kinzer, who's been a guest on Geopolitics and Empire a number of times over the years. I've got his book, The True Flag, right behind me.
Excellent book. Yeah,
great book. And I've read his other books. Unfortunately, when the book that you cite came out, and I think a few others, I tried twice to get him back on, and he declined. I think he probably scanned Geopolitics and Empire and said, it's a bit too conspiratorial for me. That's what happens with some of the leftists these days. They have their overturned window line. It's unfortunate. Kinzer does a lot of great work. He's getting older though, but you say that it was not until Kinzer's book Poisoner in Chief, Sidney Gottlieb and the CIA Search for Mind Control, that the idea of your father being intentionally poisoned by the CIA finally made sense to you, and just any further thought on and I don't think this is a quote conspiracy theory. I mean, that term itself, again, I would just, using, if Kinzer used his own logic about all the research he does on the CIA itself, they popularized that term. I interviewed the late Lance DeHaven Smith, professor emeritus, out in Florida. He passed a couple years back. I had him on the podcast. And I got his book right behind me, Conspiracy Theory in America, where he talks about the CIA memo that went out to the mainstream news, New York Times and all that, to start using that as a slur against anyone. Because people were starting to become skeptical, right, with the Warren Commission and all that. And so just your thoughts on, from your research, the deep state, the CIA, and I'm sure other alphabet agencies, the way that they can quietly take people out, the different methods that they might have.
Well, just ask Chuck Schumer. They have 6 ways from Sunday to shut you down. They have at least 6. They have the CDC. They need a new poison, just call the CDC. They have all the assets that they need to do away with people. And the reason that cancer would be chosen would because it's deniable. Remember the main directive of the CIA is plausible deniability. And so they spend millions of dollars just throwing out nonsense to confuse everybody, to make sure that nobody's ever really able to dig deep enough to see it. But once you see that they're doing that, and you believe that they're doing that, and you start changing your view of the world, then you start realizing that things like conspiracy theorists are language tools that they use to stifle people, to shut people up. It's kind of like gaslighting people in a way. It's telling you that if you keep going down this path, I will destroy your credibility. And if you do, they will. So don't be a conspiracy theorist, but be a conspiracy realist. Because if you think there's not any conspiracies, then you're crazier than the rest of us. There darn sure are conspiracies, and they're all over the place. And if you want to solve a crime, you better have a theory of how the crime happened. You better start gathering some evidence, and you better start working on a theory, or else you'll never solve the crime. Right now, where I'm at, to give you the bottom line for me, it's all still about making America Great Britain again. To me, it's the Atlantic Council, the NATO, City of London, Wall Street, the financial powers of old. That if you want, we can go from there back to the Amsterdam and Rome, Constantinople, Babylon. All the ancient empires. That when they get dissolved, they don't necessarily poof and disappear. There's still all the money laying around. There's still all the people with their own agendas. And, the Game of Thrones goes on, whether you call it the empire anymore. Well, maybe not, but still there's power structures and powers that be. And at this point, they've all been pretty much driven into the funnel created by the British intelligence services over the past, about 1550, what's that, about almost 500 years. If you go back to Walsingham and Cecil. So weaving those tentacles involves creating things like the Carnegie Corporation, Andrew Carnegie should be famous for saying that his main goal in life was to reincorporate the U.S. into Great Britain. He was Scottish by nationality. And Cold Spring Harbor, so many things we've talked about on the show, and the books that we've read all just tell me that No, it's not the Zionists. No, it's not the Jesuits. No, it's it is where the money is, and that is in the Atlantic, the Atlantic conspiracy. I think that's what it is. It's just the powers that be that, as you were talking about Mexico earlier, they're happy to get some new servitors and raise them up and burn them out during their lives. And if they screw up, well, Bertrand Russell told us what happens, right? I mean, it's the painful duty to see, this is my kid I mentored. I mean, I raised him up from nothing and I made him a colonel in the Air Force. And now I just tell him he's got to do something and he won't do it. Well, I'm sorry, but that's the rules, and you knew that when you joined. It's George Carlin's big club in a way that we're not in it, and I do not want to be in it. Thank God.
Yeah, I've met people with money. They're good and bad, but maybe the bad ones, you can tell that it's a money ideology. Like I like what you said, because recently I had on Fadi Lama, who discussed. He says they are the moneyed powers. I've brought up, I think maybe on my last live stream with you, Mark Passio, who's 8-hour lecture on the occult roots of Nazism and communism, talks about. He's a former Satanist. He calls it the occultocracy, and they're above any faction that you just mentioned, whether Zionist, Jesuit, Freemason. I'm sure those factions have a role to play within this top level hierarchy, but I think it's a money powered, it's an oligarchy, and their common ideology is money, power, and if we go further, probably some occult stuff. But it's broad, as you say. I think it incorporates everyone and anyone that they can use, and I guess to further then ask you, if we, some of the books that you discuss and during the Cold War era, we can see that you mentioned Wall Street, the CIA, the Dulles brothers, legal firms, all this sort of stuff. But today, it seems like I want to ask you, what do you think their goals, what they want today? It seems like it's expanded even further, or maybe it's always been the case, but now with the internet, everything it's more in our face with this transnational, supranational, globalist deep state, and we're seeing this thing that we're talking about with different faces now. World Economic Forum, Trilateral Commission. Starmer out in UK, he's a trilateral guy. He's a World Economic Forum guy. One of his associates there is Bilderberg, and they want, it seems, world domination. They want, Cecil Rhodes talked about a world commonwealth, a world government. So they talk about, we want a centralized world government that we control. So we've centralized the financial system, the political system, and Tony Blair now under Starmer is pushing digital ID, and it's like they want to. We are cattle that they want to put on the farm and basically fully, totally control. So, any further thoughts on the road ahead? What you think they desire going forward?
Well, I'm not permitted to speak on that until I've had my shots. And so I'll have to defer that question because I'm not taking the shots. No. My answer is the goal right now is Russia. It is to grab all the resources of that huge estate of resources that's so much, just trillions and billions and quadrillions of dollars worth of resources there. On the other end, I see it as one side of because they always have a debate, right? So it's like Trump versus Biden, right? Or Trump versus Clinton, throwing pies back and forth to keep us entertained. But, there are power structures within this imperial system. And the one that's got the power right now is NATO. And they are hell-bent to take over Russia, or at least reduce it to a banana republic. like they've done with so many of the Eastern European countries and Europe itself. To be honest, the the craziness of the elections and the whole idea of the European Union. You know, these are like unelected people that get huge salaries to be yes persons and you know, stamp of approval to whatever Ursula von der Leyen wants to do. You know, buy a bunch of uh, you know, possibly maybe someday useful drugs from her husband's drug company at the expense of Europe. Pour billions of dollars worth of military equipment into the Ukraine war, and you know, we look what's going on with Poland right now, where Poland is going to be drawn into this conflict somehow. That I think is the immediate goal. So yeah, George Orwell's 1984, I think, still is probably the best picture of the future that they want. You know, and the whole Anglo-American blob, you know, run by the philosophy of Ingsoc, which I believe I'm not sure who it was, but decoded that to mean English socialism. And that whole idea of the world basically being run by the elites, combined with the accession of the common people, who get nice things like iPhones and, you know, internet and all kinds of great appliances and things. But, you know, you have to work your ass off. You have to be a servitor or in some form or another, even if you're just working in some clerical job. If you're in a corporate environment at all, then unfortunately you're part of the big machine that ultimately dumps all of its money into the elites. So yeah, what they're doing is trying to eliminate the competition. I think Putin is genuine competition as far as keeping his nation sovereign, and I think, you know, that on the other hand, if President Trump were to get in, then he'd make peace with Putin in a moment and turn around and go after Xi in China, because, you know, that's another side of the blob that wants to take over another part of the world. And so, you know, one part wants to go east and one part wants to go west. You know, that's been the case ever since World War II. As you remember, the great America didn't want to get involved in the European war, but it took a provocation from the East to engage the American military mind in thinking, God damn it, we're going to have to fight.
Well, the false flag. I've got the book behind me. Robert Stinnett, Day of Deceits, and I was taught this in grad school, geopolitics in Geneva. The U.S. government intentionally provoked Japan. They took a multi-strategic, you know, multi-step plan to basically get Japan in a corner, like a dog with its back against the wall, forcing it to bite, which was Pearl Harbor, and effectively the U.S. government stood down intentionally so that could be used as the pretext, right, to go to war. And so, as you say, so great. I mean, the future then, it's a boot stamping on our face forever. What wonderful. What do we you know, what can we do against this as I call it, supranational deep state that has just, you know, grown in power since the days of your father? It's metastasized to such a large degree, and it doesn't seem to be going well. We've got these elections coming up in the U.S., and, you know, it just seems like they're just going to they might cement further their grip on power, and recklessly taking us to war. As you mentioned, you know, every day I'm waking up to new headlines today. You mentioned Poland. You know, the news is, where is it? I'm trying to pull it up here. Poland needs to prepare its soldiers for all-out conflict. By the way, there was the news that Cuba foiled the plot to sneak arms and ammunition onto the island from the U.S. they detained nearly 36 people in their broader scheme, authorities say, sought to destabilize its government. So when you mentioned Bay of Pigs, it's like, here we are again. The same stuff continues. Cuba today, Poland. And so any thoughts on what we can do?
I think that the main thing is to have a personal shield, a personal, Teflon suit on, to not get yourself all tangled up in something that they're trying to scare you with, to get afraid of, the next flu, or, or the secret armies in the mountains, or the drug lords taking over Arizona, or, I mean, these are scary things, but you can't let yourself dwell on those things, because then that puts you in a frame of mind in which you become defensive. And when you're in that defensive state, you cannot do the rational, logical thinking that is basically the core of my work and your work. And so the main thing is to just, don't panic. Don't let them get to you, and realize that a lot of what you're seeing is PSYOPs. Some of it's real, but they're not going to tell you which ones are real. And nevertheless, there's a lot of wisdom out there to be had. For instance, I'm very much into nutrition right now, and as you know, I have cancer, and last summer I was told it had metastasized into my lymph system, and I think that happened because I got some variant of COVID a couple of months before, because my cancer was completely in remission. I had it in 2016 and got treated, but then here it comes back, and it's now metastasized. And that word, unfortunately, is a word that appears on my father's death certificate, that he died of cancer of the kidneys with metastasis. And it was that word that my grandpa seized upon when he suggested that this was too soon for a natural event. So yeah, they really are trying to get us. And the more that you poke your head up, the more that you're going to get their attention. But I do think that the nutrition that I'm following right now, which is a very strict plant-based whole food nutrition, has been a great help to me. I'm 1 year past that speech from my urologist that he was more depressed than I was. I think he was just telling me, it's gonna spread, and you don't know when, and oh God, so depressing. So I was scared to death, but I just kept going and talked to people, and I've had dozens of people that have reached out to me to help me and get my feet back on the ground and do things to help myself. I am a believer in the antiparasiticals that you may have heard of, like fenbendazole, ivermectin, and things like that. But also, more importantly, I think, is just a real broad approach to nutrition. And I know a lot of people take a keto approach or some other approaches, but I think I found the one that works for me. It's called whole food plant-based nutrition, and I have to thank my wife for making just the most delicious meals for me. And all of this support, keeping my spirits up, takes me away from that depressing moment with my doctor a year ago, when basically he was telling me, you're a goner in 2 to 4 years. So that's not going to happen. And my other doctor, my GP guy, he said, I can cause people to die as a doctor. I can tell somebody that they're going to die, and guess what? They'll start internally preparing their body to die, and their organs will start to shut down, and they will actually, just because they're mentally convinced that they're going to die, then things will start getting worse and they'll die. And if that's the plan of the AMA, which I'm afraid it may very well be, to help the world's population problem, quote unquote, then, they're a bunch of goddamn liars. And if that's the case, if, when I'm, still playing my fiddle and dancing on their graves, I think it'll be obvious that there's a lot of flim flam stuff going on here that we don't need to be a part of in terms of medicine. So, I have a great attitude. I'm not worried about my health. I think I'm being about as productive as I've ever been. I started my whole McDuff TV now, which is on McDuffLives.com, and now I have 5 channels of replays of my material going 24/7. So you can check in there and anytime you like and see what McDuff is done with various aspects. There's a channel about health. There's my interviews with Harley Schlanger. There's my minefields, in which I spend like an hour going off on various topics, which I think many people find them very interesting. So, and I'm adding new material all the time. So I'm working hard to do my part to get the word out. Don't trust the blob. Don't take the king's coin if you can avoid it. But if you can't avoid it, just remember that there come a time, there'll come that Bertrand Russell moment when they take a look at you and see whether they can use you or they better lose you.
I think that's great advice. I just had some listeners purchase a consultation with me to get a second opinion. Some folks were, thinking about strategic relocation, and we brought up what you just. I brought up what you just brought up as well. I think you and I are both on the same frequency. Is remain calm. What's that phrase? That World War II poster? Keep calm. And don't freak out. There's a lot of PSYOPs, even in alternative media. Keep a cool head. Don't have a guru. I'm not a respecter of persons. I think that's a quote maybe from the Bible where, we're all on the level. Listen to all these different people, but then make your own decision. And don't be afraid. Right. Do the best that you can do. Have a forward-looking attitude. It's you have, even with your health issues, the fact that you have such an optimistic attitude. That's something we all should take. And I always think about John Bon Jovi's music video, the song "Blaze of Glory," and Young Guns 2, the movie with Kiefer Sutherland, where he's trapped in that cabin. They're gonna get him, and he just goes out with the blaze of glory, shooting. And metaphorically speaking, of course, this is how I think we should approach all this stuff. And so again, thanks for your work, John. The book, the link, all your links are in the description, so people can check out your book. They can follow your channel, your website. I appear on your live stream monthly. So again, thanks for everything that you're doing.
Well, you're so welcome, and maybe we'll have a Voyer Morris channel over on McDuff TV and before long. Stay tuned, folks.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast. The website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and I encourage you to sign up for the free email list that goes out with each podcast and every weekend with a collection of news headlines. The newsletter and website are our last lines of defense. We're being censored and deplatformed. It's nearly impossible to find Geopolitics and Empire on the Google search engine. We've been blacklisted. YouTube frequently takes down our videos with strikes. Facebook restricts our page. Reddit and Twitter take down posts. And after the Associated Press mentioned Geopolitics and Empire in a 2021 article co-written with NATO, our Patreon account was terminated. Vimeo also terminated our Pro account. The best free way to help Geopolitics and Empire is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or elsewhere and subscribe to all of our media channels. You can find the video broadcast now on 5 platforms: Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble, BitChute, and Brighteon. You can find the audio broadcast on the podcast ecosystem: SoundCloud, Apple, Spotify, and so on. My current favorite social media channels are Twitter and Telegram, but you can also find us on Gab, MeWe, Minds, Float, VK, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Finally, Geopolitics and Empire is in dire need of funding to continue. You can leave a donation, purchase a consultation with the host, or become a member to receive additional benefits. We also produce a weekly broadcast called Dissident Thinker for members and Rockfin subscribers only. We will continue to fight the good fight come hell or high water. Thank you for listening.